Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leaning In and Speaking Out, the Research Connection podcast. I'm excited about our discussion today, and I think all of you will enjoy it. We're talking to a teacher and a university researcher, and I think we're talking about science, maybe. And I think we're all going to learn a lot. I'm Jackie Kirk, and I'm in the Department of Leadership and Educational Administration at Brandon University, and I'm the chair of the grad program. And I'm joined today by a guest host. Shawna, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll go and introduce our guests as well.
Well, thank you for having me today. I'm Shawna Philpott. I am the Director of Field Experience here at the Faculty of Education. So I coordinate the student teachers on their practicums for the undergraduate students. I also am very excited to be here to have a discussion about some science. And my background is environmental science prior to my time as a teacher and teaching at the middle years level, predominantly grade 5, 6, 7, 8. So thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Latika.
Thank you, Jackie and Shawna and Peter. I'm delighted to be part of this community with you and thinking about learning in and speaking out. And currently, I am working as a science instructor with the University of Manitoba. I am also part of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Committee. And so I'm co-chair of Access and the Operation Diversity, Decolonization and Equity Committee with the Faculty of Education here at University of Manitoba, and I'm also the current president for Science Education Research Group of Canada. And I am delighted to be part of this conversation with you all, and I'm looking forward to think about the ways that we can make science education more responsive for the students who are coming from diverse cultural backgrounds, and also thinking about how we might work with the teachers and support teachers and also the school principals and vice principals in supporting their teachers and also learning alongside with the Indigenous community and Indigenous elders. So this is where the focus of my research has been, to think about social and ecological justice and work alongside with the various educational stakeholders and larger communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Peter Grozdanovic. I'm an elementary school teacher at Strathcona Elementary School. It's a small school in the inner city of Winnipeg. For the last 5 years, I've placed a lot of emphasis on inquiry work and engaging students and being sensitive to their experiences and giving them a platform to have a level of influence over what they're going to learn and helping them find their voices, their powerful voices, and advocating for the things that they believe in.
Thank you. Well, let's get started. Latika, will you tell us about your research first?
Thank you, Jackie. So as I mentioned, my research interests are around responsiveness, specifically in science education and in mathematics education. So this is where my learning journey began with the teachers in Micronesia. Before coming to Canada, I was working with the teachers in Micronesia, and also during my doctoral program, I had the privilege of learning alongside with the teachers in British Columbia, and then learning alongside with the principals and school principals in Ontario and Saskatchewan. And so this is like I would say my geographical learning journey, but also my intellectual learning journey, walking alongside with the communities in different cultural contexts. So the focus has been in my research around cultural responsiveness. So I'll talk with you about two of my projects. One is focused more around cultural responsiveness. The other one is focused more around social and ecological justice, more alongside the lines of how we can bring critical scientific literacy that can inform education for decarbonized clean energy futures. So the first research project is with the school principals and vice principals in Saskatchewan. and that focused on asking the school principals and vice principals how do they see their role as leaders in the school K to 12 school context, and what does cultural responsiveness means to them when they're working and learning alongside with the students and teachers and parents and larger community who are culturally coming from diverse cultural backgrounds. And the second research project is investigating teacher candidates' perspectives around low dose radiations and connecting it to the larger context of climate change and climate literacy and scientific literacy. So I'm really looking forward to discuss more aspects of this research with you, and looking forward to also learn more about Peter's work. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to tell us a little bit about the inquiry projects and problem-based learning that you've been doing in your classroom?
Absolutely. So I began my journey in project-based learning just under 5 years ago. And at that time, I was introduced to some pillars of project-based learning, things like tackling real issues, becoming informed, supporting one another, and connecting to the community. And had done a number of smaller projects that were about 3 months in length. But then there was a sudden, I remember listening to the news. I was on summer vacation, and I had heard about the Indigenous children's bodies that were found at former residential schools. And I started thinking about it, and I really couldn't get it out of my mind. And I said, I'm going to create a unit around this. But I was apprehensive whether I would implement that particular unit. And so we worked on it, and then when I remember emailing my principal over the summer with ideas that I had, and then I reached out to some Indigenous support workers in our division, and we went ahead with the unit, and it was a turning point in my teaching practices. We had students that were so heavily engaged in this topic, and it was really important for us to keep it age appropriate. I knew that one of the things that would follow is something called the Nzuva curve. As we introduce anyone to new information, we can, the curve tells us that initially there might be a level of sadness or guilt, and we don't want to end it there. Then we start talking a little bit about advocacy, what people are doing to help remedy the situation. And then the big step is, can we advocate? Can our students step up and take leadership roles in trying to move this advocacy period forward? And so I remember we decided we were going to do this film, and we created a storyboard for the film. And I said, let's make this film silent. Let's let people watching the film make their own decisions on what this all means. And a student approached me after class and said, Mr. G, I think we should be the voices of those Indigenous students that had no voice. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of the power that I felt that as we give students a little more responsibility, what they can come up with. And that was a lesson in the strength of project-based learning. And there were a number of things that happened over those 4 months that really I had never experienced before as a teacher. And so then we moved on to other important topics, especially science. Last year, I had a number of students who came up to me and said, when I'm on my reserve, sometimes the water is sticky. Sometimes it smells. I had newcomers who came to me and said, we have to go long distances at times to find clean water. And so then we started looking at, over the summer, I started to plan a skeleton unit on water and advocacy for water and what was happening in the world with, depletion of water reserves and that sort of thing. And I think about what Latika said, and when you give students the opportunity to explore something that's meaningful for them, that's close to their heart, it's amazing the work that we can do. And I said, well, let's create a story. And we created a storyboard, and I said, well, why don't we create a story and film underwater? And everyone kind of looked at me. I said, no, we'll figure out how to do this. And so I had all these wonderful ideas, but I'd never filmed underwater. And we had, we talk about collaboration. We had Indigenous people that helped us with the project. We had master divers that volunteered their time. We filmed in a pool. We had people who were video editors and graphic designers, and all of them worked with our students. And we came up with something that initially we didn't know how it would work, but a pretty amazing piece of advocacy for, what was happening on Indigenous reserves, the fact that, facilities were being built, but they weren't being maintained. The fact that some reserves had gone years and years without clean water, still water advisories. Mm-hmm. And that advocacy, them seeing that science can be applicable to them and they could advocate for change was extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when you are saying, Peter, I wanted to also say when I was engaged with the principals and vice principals in Saskatchewan, thinking about what are the critical issues that they are engaging with on an everyday basis with the schools. And this is the time when we were having our professional development workshops with the principals and vice principals. And they were I think this was May 2021, May 27th, if I remember correctly, when we had unmarked graves discovered in Kamloops. And the conversation in our group was thinking about when we say science and technology and innovations, we also wanted to recognize what you were saying about giving voices to the people. So we were questioning that from many years, Indigenous peoples have been telling that our children have not come back. Those children are missing. And we had now those radar technologies that helped us in identifying those unmarked graves. And people are thinking on saying that, oh, this is a shock. And I wanted to question this, and I wanted to initiate this conversation that why do we still think about only Western modes of science as one that is more authentic or as the only science? Why were not we really listening to the people's voices when they were telling their trauma, when they were sharing their traumatic stories that their children have not come back? And now we have this radar technology that has helped us in identifying those unmarked graves. So this is where the real understanding of Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action should be coming, where we think about what is the truth and whose truth we are validating, and giving students and giving teachers and giving people and the larger communities those spaces and those voices where they can see their role in making the change, their role in bringing that change in the society. Because when we talk about scientific literacy, it's not only about knowledge and skills. Like when we think about Pan-Canadian Science Framework, it's not only the knowledge and skills, we are talking about attitudes and habits of mind. And we are talking about science, technology, society, and environmental decision making. So when you talked about boiled water advisories or the how the Indigenous communities are still being treated. So in my work also, when we were talking about clean energy futures and trying to understand the teacher candidates' perspectives about low dose radiations, there were conversations around uranium mining and how the Indigenous communities were not informed that the people were asked to carry uranium filled in the bags on their back, and they were not informed. And in my earlier work in Micronesia, I came to learn about Bikini Atoll, where the bikini, if you know, it's sometimes people think this is just a lady's undergarment, but it was an atoll in It is an atoll in Marshall Islands, which was devastated by the hydrogen bomb that was tested by the United States, and the land is still contaminated. So this is like social justice issues, ecological justice issues that we want to bring in when we think about responsiveness and giving voices to the people. And what you mentioned is like learning alongside with the communities and inviting Indigenous elders and bringing that cross-cultural and curricular understandings, like you said, bringing a story or bringing a song or poetry is very critical. We don't really want to think about bringing science as just a content focus that is isolated from all other perspectives and all other aspects of life. And this is what I try to bring in my research. And there is a critical need for broadening the scope of what do we mean by science, what is critical scientific literacy, and what is climate literacy, and how we can bring alongside and work alongside with all people who are involved in these communal learning experiences.
I think building upon what you're saying, I recall when we did the unit on water that I wanted to broaden our perspective to a more worldwide perspective of what was going on at that time and still going on. But the key was to start what the students were experiencing. And the fact that students were experiencing things on reserves or had come to Canada and experienced water issues was just a wonderful starting point. And then we could bring in some scientific concepts to move a little bit beyond that. But that initial engagement when we're talking about addressing students' voices and what they were experiencing was a major part of engaging them in science in a different way rather than lecturing. Let's take what they know, and they had their own stories. When we talked about residential schools, I had students who came to me and talked to me about how residential schools in the 60s scoops had affected their personal families. Mm-hmm. And I had families that came to me and said, my son has been talking about this unit, and they worked together with their families and came up with stories. And we recorded those stories. And although the film was fantastic, it is those stories that we recorded of just students sitting and talking about the impacts and the stories that they had personally that really kind of made residential schools really personal and to our whole classroom. And people then kind of ask questions and things that they wouldn't do by just watching a video or just me talking in front of the classroom. Mm-hmm. And some very rich discussions about what had happened, and then advocating, like, what are we going to do about this? It's still affecting families. Mm-hmm. And then when you have everyone on board like that, the momentum that sort of builds with that and the excitement of students looking forward to, okay, what are we doing next? Mm-hmm. How are we going to do this? We should write to the Prime Minister. Let's write to the Prime Minister. All those little things that they had not even considered was a possibility initially. Mm-hmm. But as a collective, what we can do and collaborating with partners from the community, there is a strength to that the students begin to feel that their voices are going to be heard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shawna, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would. I've been listening and I'm just enjoying, and I'm seeing so many connections that between your research and also what you've been doing in the classroom. And what I would like to say is that I just see so much power in the agency that you've fostered in your students and throughout the course of your projects and over the years. And I'm sure you yourself have noticed your own growth as an educator. And what does that mean to be an eco advocate and justice for someone who is here for positive social change as well? So what I'm wondering, and Latika, I'm wondering from you as well, is I notice in previous roles as a continuous improvement coach, someone who works with teachers on their professional development, some of the times sometimes we can point to things we would like to see different in our classrooms, or ways in which we can do a project-based learning, if that's the case, or a new way to engage students in authentic learning experiences. And sometimes the hardest obstacle for us is that implementation stage. And I noticed that you've developed this unit over the summer, and you had that relationship with your administrator. So, Latika, you had mentioned that administrators sometimes feel as though they are wishing to see this kind of work happening in classrooms. And what advice might you have for teachers who are looking to implement this positive change? And Latika, what advice do you have for administrators who'd like to implement project-based learning or some kind of project to enhance our students' agency?
Yeah, thank you, Shawna. And I think when I started my work, my learning alongside with the teachers, that the key thing was that teachers were very passionate and motivated, and it was a time when we had Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action was recently released in 2015, and then many curricular motivations were to invite indigenous ways of knowing, and also thinking about the students' diversity, so that immigration policies, with the change in the immigration policies, the teachers are experiencing more and more students coming from diverse cultural backgrounds, and there is a lot of linguistic diversity and also geographical and regional and religious diversity. So the one thing that I would say, and it was in also reflected in national survey by the Canadian Teachers Association in 2012, that when they asked teachers what is the key challenge that you experience in your classrooms, one of the things that they said was, first thing they said was student diversity, various dimensions of student diversity. And in my doctoral research, this was again echoed. And when I'm currently engaged with the teacher candidates, I'm teaching elementary and middle years and also secondary teacher candidates in University of Manitoba, the key thing that they are perplexed with is about focus on the content, and they worry about the time constraints. There are also limitations of funding. There are also limitations of resources, and then there is sometimes also like, who do we tap into, whose shoulder we tap into if we want to have some guidance, because especially at the secondary level, it's still teaching happens mostly in within the boundaries of those subject areas, like someone is teaching biology, chemistry, or physics, and they might have an informal conversation about some other aspects of teaching or school life during lunchtime, but they don't really have an opportunity to engage with each other and look at the curriculum of biology or physics or chemistry or other subject areas, and math and English or other subject areas, and think like how you can bring that cross-curricular connection into your teaching, because the teachers are also overwhelmed with the assessments and also expectations of the university. So it's like a whole pipeline that you could see that in the beginning, when the child is young, there is so much interest and enthusiasm in learning sciences or engaging with mathematics. But as we go through, there is a leaky pipeline. Many of the students feel marginalized. Many of the students feel that their voices are not heard. And teachers are themselves perplexed with this. They are trying to bring responsiveness in their teaching, but there are so many factors that are influencing them, and they're limiting their opportunities to bring responsiveness. And same thing with the principals and vice principals. So when I talk about it in my research, is also I bring in trans multiculturally responsive education framework that I was fortunate to conceptualize during my doctoral program, and I have published some papers around this, around religious diversity, gender inclusivity in science. And this framework talks about relational caring, understanding our relationship as a member of a human community, human kin, and bringing that holistic learning that Indigenous ways of knowing talk about. And also talks about engaging with difference, with solidarity and critique. So when we think about multicultural education in Canadian schools, mostly we follow that multicultural education policy that talks about respecting our tolerating the difference or accepting the difference. And in my work, I talk about moving beyond 4Ds. So dance, diet, dress, and dialect. These are the four things that we usually see when we talk about cultural responsiveness. And in my engagement with the school principals in the research that I just mentioned with you, they were also noticing that, like, for example, one of the school principal mentioned they were working with a francophone French immersion school, and they said that in my school, I noticed when we have Black History Month, the English Anglophone teachers are more bringing in conversations around Black history and critical conversations around what should be done. But the teachers who are teaching in French immersion program, they are not very comfortable, and they say that we don't have many more resources. So as a principal now, this person, by participating in this research study, they were becoming more aware of that what is their role and what they could do as a school principal to support the teachers. So one small thing that we suggested through this study was maybe just look at your school library and see what are the books available, which language the books are available with. And another thing we suggested, maybe create a small professional development learning community in your schools. Like, why do we wait for the school boards or school divisions to organize Pro-D events? Could we have an informal Pro-D within our community where the teachers can work in those cohesive groups and make communities of learning where they can maybe, for example, read a book, make a book club where some of the groups of the teachers can come together and talk about certain aspects. Like there are books that talk about racism, there are books that talk about cultural responsiveness, or maybe somebody might have attended a conference or attended a workshop where they can share their learning, and if that we can have those conversations on an ongoing basis. And also tapping into a community, inviting Indigenous elders, so actively providing funding support for inviting Indigenous elders. And this is something I try to do it in my teaching also with the university level. So actively seeking out with the departments and also with the university, and actively seeking out. So this is something maybe the teachers can do, and also principals and vice principals can support their teachers in making those priorities very concrete, and talking to the other stakeholders and building those communal connections, and looking into their own social and structural systems. Like we may have so many hidden barriers within our school system that I call structural racism, or within our modes of teaching that we talk about scientific racism. So looking back into our own practices, reflecting on our own practices, and thinking about unhidden, unconscious biases that we may ourselves hold, and working towards dismantling those structural barriers, and thinking about how can I be myself a trans multiculturally responsive educator who is trying to engage with others in a relational manner, and taking my responsibility not only as just for the human world, but more than human world. Like when we talk about social and ecological justice or Indigenous ways of knowing, talk about relational connectedness with more than human world. So how do we bring those understandings in our science classrooms? So I hope I have answered some aspects of your question, Shawna.
Yes, thank you so much, Latika. And I just want to build on what you're saying. And if you are a teacher listening to this podcast, I would like just to point out there are some structural supports that can be put in place. So if you are a teacher in Manitoba, the MTS does have a grant fund available. So currently it's the Collaborative Learning Team grant, and it will provide release time and supports for initiatives to develop your own professional learning community. So thank you for that. That's a really great sage advice.
I know that there are many teachers who would love to implement things like project-based learning. Maybe there's some concern, but I know there's a swell of enthusiasm to try this. And the way I looked upon this was that it wasn't going to be an addition. It was going to be something that would allow students to have purpose to write, purpose to research. Mm-hmm. So it was going to complement the work that I was already doing. And I was really fortunate. A month or so ago, I was able to do a seminar for some teachers from Stanley Knowles School. And the principal came to our school as well. And the enthusiasm that I felt in that room of wanting to do something that more relates to students, that's going to be exciting, that's going to invite students to be part of that learning process and the direction they were moving in, it was amazing. And I think all sometimes teachers are looking for is who's doing this? How do we do this? Mm-hmm. And to feel that support from their administration. I know that I'm extremely fortunate that my administration is not only supportive, but like I'll be standing in front of their doors waiting to have my next discussion. I'm thinking of this. What's your viewpoint on this? And they are, I can sense their personal enthusiasm and their connection to what we're doing. And it just builds a momentum. And it's a way of teaching that I think is the direction we need to be doing, because students have a wealth of information, life experience, and we need to kind of give them that avenue to be able to express that. And then, especially in our inner city when we're trying to improve graduation rates, and we need to provide ways of delivering content that's culturally responsive to where they're coming from and what their lives are like. And I really find that this approach is really moving us in that particular direction.
Will you talk to us a little bit about how you organize it in a practical sense, like how you organize it within your classroom, and then how much time, sort of you put in during the classroom day, and how much time is put out outside of that?
Okay. Well, I want to start by saying you don't have to start with large projects. I mean, my first project was 3 months long, and it revolved around the novel we were reading, The One and Only Ivan, and it had to do with advocacy for animals. And it was just the very beginning. I mean, I'm at a point now, almost 5 years later, where the units are year-long units. And I'm going to talk briefly about this year's unit because I'm very excited about it. We were starting to hear information about the landfill search that was going on for slain First Nations women and the controversy around that particular topic. And the way, at least in the past years, the way Indigenous women were treated when they went missing, and how they were represented in the media. And I think there certainly have been improvements since that time. But that was a topic that we were starting to lightly discuss in our classroom. And I mean, I had students who had cousins that were missing. And so that was something, it wasn't something that, how are we going to discuss it? Well, they're experiencing this. And so the first thing that I do is I always encourage teachers to find something that they're personally passionate about. And then think about how that connects to what their students are passionate about. Because if you're excited about what you're doing, students will feel that. And then you're going to go through those times that are a bit messy when you try something new. So I always start first by planning out where do I want to be at the end of this? What is that finished product going to be? And then I just move backwards design. And then the next thing I do is I take a look at who are the stakeholders, because I'm always talking to people, and I'll go to like an art store and I'll talk to the person who's there. I said, oh, well, I'm working on this project, and I'll talk about what we're doing and trying to build those connections. I find that a lot of the collaborations happen because people want to share their talents and their strengths. And I'm always looking for people's strengths and seeing how we can connect together, whether it's now or in the near future. And this year especially, we're infusing STEAM. But next year, I'm going to think about what you said, Latika, about EE, and see if we can kind of look at that a little bit differently. I think that's something that really interests me. And looking at especially like collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, communication. That was our first real goal. But now our goal within our project is helping students to that risk-taking, making them more resilient, and the idea of reflection, like thinking more deeply about what's going on and what they can do. And, working with people within the division, there are in my school alone, there is so much expertise in the school that sometimes you just have to cross the hallway and say, hey, I see you've been doing this. Can I get your idea on what's going on here? This is what I'm thinking of doing. And that was really my first line of collaboration. I collaborated in my first PBL with an EA, educational assistant. And we would talk back and forth, and she would challenge my ideas, and I would ask her questions. But we had formed a team, and the students could see we were working together. And that was the first line of collaboration. And of course, having that amazingly supportive administration that's not just willing to say yes, but ask hard questions like, why are you doing this? Where is this heading to? And helping you determine those answers. And over time, you just build a tremendous amount of confidence. I'm at a point now where I feel whatever I decide to do with my students, we can figure out how to make it happen. And no matter how extreme that whole idea, the idea is, but that whole idea of being able to work together and feel confident, and you have to pre-plan simply because you need a template of where you're going. But after that, a number of things happen pretty organically, and you allow the students to express their personal opinions. Like, for example, this year in our project, we have a group of students who have tasks that they're doing. They can sign up for various aspects of the project. And we had a group of students who wanted to create our poetry. And they worked for 2.5 months working with another teacher because I was so invested in the project that I wanted the poetry to sound a certain way. And I knew I was the wrong person. So I reached out to a colleague and said, can you take the students and work on this piece of poetry? We were going to look at where I'm from poetry, which is reflecting on them personally. And then found poetry because we were dealing with a subject that someone had never experienced. And we combined those two. And I remember coming in a few weeks and saying, okay, I'm thinking this would be a great addition to the piece of poetry. And I counseled the teacher to say, just listen to me, but don't listen to me. And she would say, great idea. Okay, we'll talk to you later. And then she would continue to work with the students until they came up with this piece of poetry. And I said, well, we're going to create an original piece of music. How would we do that? We reach out to musicians who are collaborating with us, writing chord progressions for the instruments, students who play violin and indigenous drum, cello, and those students are coming together. And I'm talking about this terminology, but I have none of that before. So I'm talking to musicians and people who are at TechVoc who do have a professional recording studio, and I'm trying to understand the language. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm starting to think about next year. And one of the things I found was that language, when you're on the outside and you're trying to learn a language, you really feel like you're struggling. And so one of the things that I'm starting to think about is Indigenous language preservation. And just how, maybe we might be able to approach that topic next year. But I find that I learn as much from my students as they learn from me, because I have these plans that I spent a tremendous amount of time developing, and then the students will say something like, oh, we're developing these images to reflect the poetry that was created. And then we have a conversation and said, well, there's enough images and poetry that we could create a book. And I said, well, great, we're going to publish a book. And I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but we're going to figure that out as well. But the power of the students then, they're writing knowing that their names will be attached to this poetry or attached to these visuals. Just that level of engagement, whether it is I'm advocating for something in science or something else, in this case, missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, there is a power to what the students can accomplish. Yeah.
I really liked your focus on bringing social change, Peter. So when I was working with teaching in the Marshall Islands, the students, we were talking about physics and chemistry and radioactivity and nuclear power plants, and students were really disengaged. And when I came to know the reason for this disengagement by talking with some of the students, it was because of the nuclear bomb testing that was done on the community. And when I transformed the learning through making it more community engaged, and where I invited students to connect with the community members and ask about the history of nuclear bomb testing. And we tried to organize a science fair by learning with the community. The powerful learning happened in that instance, that we invited the people from other schools. We invited the politicians, we invited the local parliament people, and we also invited the ambassadors from different countries. Some of those were even involved in the nuclear bomb testing. And this actually transformed the learning. So what you're talking about, bringing that STEAM framework, broadening the scope of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to bring an art and aesthetics aspect, and also again bringing that critical scientific literacy. And I also wanted to say the STEAM, like STEEM, where we talk about environment and elders' wisdom. If we bring that also into our conversations, when we talk about scientific inquiry, we mostly talk about 5 E's. So there is a BIBES framework of 5 E's that talk about exploration and engagement and all other aspects. But I think First Nations Steering Education Committee in British Columbia, they have released some teacher resources that talk about 7 E's, and they specifically, in addition to those 5 E's, they try to bring in elders' wisdom and environmental connections. And this is what I would say as a teacher. This is where we can begin with. When you talked earlier about, Shawna, like what could be the practical steps that you could do, is community engagement, broadening the scope of inquiry, and learning alongside with the people. But what I wanted to say, in my research, I've noticed that mostly the teachers, when they are talking about responsiveness, there is a lot of effort in bringing that responsiveness in instruction. But when it comes to assessment, it's often falling back into those chapter tests or quizzes or worksheets. So in my work, I try to engage with the teachers and with the principals and vice principals also. I said that, how would you bring those 6 C's, that is choice, collaboration, critical thinking, communication, creativity, and care, ethics for care for human and more than human world, in all aspects of your school engagement. And when you talk about the curriculum, not only thinking of curriculum that is explicitly given to you by the ministries, or when we look at the document. So I want to question, like, what is curriculum? Is it just the explicit document that you are handed down, or is the curriculum something that transpires, like you were saying, Peter, when the students asked to create a book, so then the curriculum transformed. So I actually was able to make some books with the students in Marshall Islands and Micronesia, where I was teaching earlier, talking about social justice and ecological justice and the issues that were more required to talk about in the community. So I actually was able to create 2 books where students wrote their interviews and poems and poetries and stories, and also essays around certain issues that like pollution, teenage pregnancy, mental health and well-being. So one more area that I wanted to say is taking care of mental health and well-being of the teachers, and also the school leaders, and also the students and larger community, is something that we need to think more when we are bringing those understandings. And cultural responsiveness, I also wanted to emphasize 6 R's that are informed by Indigenous ways of knowing. Dr. Joan Archibald and has a book that talks about educating not only the mind and body, but talks about educating the heart and the spirit. And in that book, she has quoted Kirkner's and Bernhardt's work around 4 R's. So 4 R's, and I've extended those 4 R's to 6 R's in my work. And I talk about respect, relevance, reciprocity, and relationality and responsibility, and also reverence, like I said earlier, like whose truth we are trying to validate in our science classrooms. But we also want to be cautioned about misinformation that is so much prevalent and so much accessible to our students, especially with the access to technology and all those digital sources. So when we talk about science, how do we bring that critical scientific literacy. So when you are trying to plan something, and this is what coming from principals' work research that I engaged with, also talking about like the principals wanted to say that they want to be present. So there are 4 P's here, and these are informed by Dr. Sabre Cherokski's work around teacher leadership or leadership in schools. They talk about presence, purpose, playfulness, and also passion that you mentioned. So I'm really curious to know a little bit more about how do you envision bringing that responsiveness in your assessments when you are sharing your project-based learning. This is really interesting. But then what ultimately happens? How do you support and assess students, and how do you see them feeling recognized and feeling that they have achieved something meaningful?
Well, I know we had done an analysis of a book called Missing the Mama. And it was a way we introduced missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people to my classroom. And the students took excerpts from that book, and their goal was to analyze it more deeply, to take that line and then create from that found poetry, to take the lines that most spoke to them. And then we were going to take a look at creating sculptures that reflect their work. We did that out of tinfoil. And so what we were looking at there was I looked through the curriculum, and we were looking at responding to text, things like experiencing various texts, connecting self to text and culture, appreciate the artistry of text. And that was our connection. And what the students came up with, and they could also they could add to that piece of poetry if they chose to. And that was one way we looked at assessment. Assessment was also done after they had completed this project. They spent 2.5 weeks preparing to present their work. We invited our principal and vice principal and other teachers to come and ask questions. They prepared their questions like, what does the poetry mean to me? How does my sculpture connect to that piece of poetry? And then after a week or so of them rehearsing, simply even being able to stand calmly for 20 minutes and listen and be engaged, and using mindfulness to prepare them for what was going to happen. And then after the week and a half, I started asking them questions that we had not prepared for. And seeing what the responses would be to see. And some of them were ready. Others started to get apprehensive. So we came up with, well, how do we approach questions that you may not have the answer for right now? So all my students, I had this line where, I don't have the answer to that right now, but I can get back to you. And so that was it was wonderful. And I would listen to this as the principal would ask questions. And it was an experience where I sat in the back of the classroom, and I just I wanted them to see what they could do without me supporting them. Mm-hmm. It was hard to stay away, but it was the first step to saying, well, here is what I know, and here's what I know on a deeper level than just being able to answer, oh, you've read that, summarize for me. Ask, what do you have any questions? It was like, how does that relate to you personally? Mm-hmm. And that's when I sort of see the power of inquiry and the power of delivering the curriculum in a way that's meaningful for the students so that they can have more deeper ideas on what's going on. And that's when I knew we were ready for a lot more than just analyze what they were creating. They were analyzing music and lyrics and our connection to the ELA curriculum. I really believe if you're going to get the best possible writing out of a person, it's got to be something that they have a connection with already, mm-hmm. something they're passionate about. Mm-hmm. And where in the past I've seen some pieces of writing that I look and say, oh, we could have done much better. All of a sudden I'm saying, what? Like that's I hadn't considered that. That's amazing. Can you talk to me about what you just wrote there? And I think it's what rejuvenates me as a teacher is the excitement that students can show and the insight that they have given a safe environment where we're encouraged that the amazing things that can happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's so wonderful. And I'm just noticing all the moves that you're making to decentralize yourself as the sole knowledge keeper in the room. And I think that's such a powerful part of the success of your projects. And I think that that's a very difficult task. And that's something that the students in my own classroom experiences with PBL have expressed that they appreciate when it's not my project that they just get to put their name on. So I think that's such a powerful thing that you're doing and that you continue to do.
That is a hard thing to do because I'll spend 4 months planning a unit and I have a direction that I want to move and I have an end goal that I want to achieve.
Detached from it.
Yeah, and it's taken some time to sort of say, but the students might take this in a way that I'd not considered that would be enhance what we're doing. And that's something that has been, for someone that enjoys planning and putting units together, that's taken some time. But now I see the power of it, and I can't wait for a student to give me their idea that we could take things in a slightly different direction, and spend some time talking to them about what they know. And when you give them that avenue and they know their voices are valued, the confidence. I sit in the back of my class sometime, and I'm wearing this mask, and I have a smile on my face because I'm just listening to what they're doing and what they're saying and the confidence that they're showing over the scope of a year, and motivates me to think of what's next.
I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'll give you just a couple of minutes if anybody has anything else that they'd like to say about the topic. And otherwise, we'll call it a day.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here at this podcast, to get the word out on what's possible, and especially I want to advocate for my inner city schools that sometimes, are not considered producing high levels of achievement. And for me to sort of say that that is not the case. The case is that our students are exceptional with amazing experiences, and their connection to the curriculum and their knowledge is just something that you have to experience to see. And I invite people to, on May the 23rd, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights will be hosting their Upstandard event. And we plan on being there. And there'll be schools, as I said, represented from across the province. And that if you're looking to start in advocacy or in PBL, that is an amazing event to go to. It's open to the public. It's free. And all you have to do is go on their website, and more information will be posted soon. And if you're looking to try something new or enhance what you're already doing, that is a great place to start.
I also wanted to echo Peter in thanking you all and giving me this opportunity. I also wanted to again emphasize what people like Peter and other teachers are doing, and I really appreciate that amazing work that's being put into the practice and bringing that social change. I also wanted to say one more thing, like standing together as a community is critical, and understanding that in this age, like I mentioned earlier, thinking about the critical need for scientific literacy, and also understanding intergenerational trauma, and also thinking about what are the possible scientific innovations. Like, for example, when we say possibility for clean energy, decarbonized future is nuclear energy. But then there are so many things that have happened in the past. There have been nuclear accidents happening. There have been instances where the people were not being informed about those radioactivity, fallout, and other things. So this is where we want to think about, if we want to move forward as a society, thinking about our goals in Canada as a country, where we're thinking about by 2050 we will have clean energy, we will have low carbon resources and alternative energy sources. And we want to think about a country that values and recognizes Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and embraces relational understandings of science and bring those cross-curricular bridges. We want to think about what we can do at all levels and what we can think about at our personal level and also at communal level, and also think about the well-being, because well-being of not only the people, well-being of the larger community, and well-being of this planet, Mother Earth, because like we said, that there is no planet B. We want to think about social and ecological justice in all aspects of our teaching, learning, and research, and in our being. And I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you all today.
I'd like to add one more thing.
Sure.
I looked upon this podcast as another way of collaborating with professionals. And when I think about the strength of collaboration, I know through my almost 5 years of working at project-based learning, I've been really careful to document the process of learning. It allows me an opportunity to reflect at the end and how I would change things, what were the strengths and weaknesses of that unit. And I want to say to the audience that please don't hesitate to reach out. I have a number of resources that I've accumulated over 5 years, and I've always made it available to anyone who's interested. So if you want to reach out and take a look at how I started to where we are right now, I have all those documents fully planned out.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I would also like to extend the invitation to the teachers and also to you. Maybe the teacher candidates would love to connect with you if I can have that opportunity to connect the teacher candidates of my courses. And I also wanted to say this is what we want to emphasize, that communal connections and communal learning together, and also recognizing that a scholarship doesn't have to be just written. So I really appreciate Brandon University's initiative and the center's initiative of learning and speaking out. So also communicating that scholarship could happen in ways like podcasts. It's a communication that is building and is strengthening this initiatives that we are all passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to say once again, thank you very much, both of you, for your time and the work that you're doing. I think that it's wonderful to hear just how passionate you both are of the work in the field and with your teacher candidates, Latika, and the administrators, and in the research that you're doing. And you both speak to lots of care being held for the mental health and wellness of the people you work with as well. And I think that's one piece that can be a difficult thing for teachers to navigate, is in being culturally responsive and taking on these very difficult and highly polarizing topics can be extremely heavy, and sometimes very heavy load to carry as a student and sometimes a very young student in our classroom, and navigating that in a very caring way to weave in these threads of hope. I think that the work you're doing is transformative, so thank you.